Labour covered up anti-Semitic death threats against Luciana Berger. They told neither her nor the police, and it only came to light when it was leaked to the press weeks later.
Shame on Luciana Berger, a Zionist bitch. I hate her baby.
You are a spy. You are evil, satanic. Leave. Hashtag Labour, hashtag Corbyn.
And when the details of the far-right exchange were pointed out, Gardiner still recommended against suspension. The testimony says that the suspended member was a personal friend of the leader's office.
It is a smear to say that the Labour Party has a problem with anti-Semitism.
One figure has been particularly prominent in campaigning for the deselection of MPs who have spoken critically of Corbyn, including those whose only criticism was over anti-Semitism. I'm speaking, of course, of Chris Williamson. Since the 2017 general election, Chris Williamson has been urging people to ignore accusations of anti-Semitism in Labour and to write it off as a smear. In 2018, he launched what he called a Democracy Roadshow to try and oust MPs who were critical of Corbyn. He would visit their local constituencies and whip up activists against those MPs who had been critical of Corbyn, even if their only crime was defending Jews. Chris Williamson defended numerous people suspended from the party over anti-Semitism, including high-profile cases like Ken Livingstone and Jackie Walker, and other less high-profile cases like his defence of Scott Nelson. He also defended Peter Wilsman, and supported his election to Labour's National Executive Committee in September 2018. And one of those on Chris Williamson's JC9 slate was even eventually on the panel that readmitted Chris Williamson to the Labour Party in June 2019. Over a year and a half, Chris Williamson developed into one of Labour's most prominent anti-Semites. He baited the Jewish community, even on one occasion, just hours after 11 Jews were shot dead in a synagogue in Pittsburgh. He tweeted about the Jewish Board of Deputies being anti-Semitic. Chris Williamson has spent all of his time since the general election hounding out Jews and trying to discredit those who speak out about anti-Semitism. Corbyn even defended Chris Williamson in January 2019.
Are you concerned about the allegations of anti-Semitism against him?
Chris Williamson is a very good, very effective Labour MP. He's a very strong anti-racist campaigner. He is not anti-Semitic in any way.
Okay.
Chris Williamson then resigned in November with a resignation letter that the campaign against anti-Semitism described as a manifesto against Jews. And finally there is Richard Burgon, Labour Shadow Justice Secretary and Shadow Lord Chancellor, denying repeatedly that he had used the words Zionism is the enemy of peace, probably because he thought that the video footage of him saying exactly that wouldn't surface.
You told a Labour Party meeting, did you not, in 2016, that Zionism is the enemy of peace?
Well, that was an allegation made by the Daily Express. I asked them at which meeting I was meant to have said that.
I think it was reported in the Daily Mail.
But did you say that? They couldn't respond to me. I didn't say that, and they couldn't tell me when they believed I had said that. It's not my view.
So I believe you didn't say. I mean, it's important because you may well be correcting the record.
Well, I would not have said that because it's not my view.
Okay.
So you didn't say it?
Well, you didn't say it. You've said that.
And the enemy of the Palestinian people is not the Jewish people. The enemy of the Palestinian people are Zionists, and Zionism is the enemy of peace and the enemy of the Palestinian people.
And then in other video footage, we see him saying that he was falsely accused of outrageous slander.
False accusations fly as soon as you support the people of Palestine. And I myself, in some small way, was attacked, and I was accused of a false and outrageous slander.
For those watching who don't immediately get why saying Zionism is the enemy of peace, Zionism is the enemy of the Palestinian people is outrageous, because in brief, it's so easy to be Zionist and pro-Palestinian. The very notion of a two-state solution is support for both Zionism and the self-determination of the Palestinian people. Burgon's original comments are an absurd defamation of the Jewish right to self-determine. But I'm not bringing this up here because I think that Burgon's original comments are an egregious anti-Semitic remark. I wouldn't go that far. I'm bringing this up because Burgon has a victim mentality, even though he was indeed in the wrong. And that victim mentality is one that subverts the oppression. I don't like being called a racist, and I feel victimised because you're calling me a racist. And my last example in this section, why is Labour institutionally anti-Semitic, is that after all of this, after 4 years of this battle with the Jewish community over treating anti-Jewish racism differently from all other forms of racism, a scandal which has seen Jewish MPs and their allies the subject of vicious anti-Semitic attacks, a scandal which has seen the resignations of dozens of Labour elected officials and countless Jewish members, a scandal which has seen at least 70 staff provide testimony revealing how Corbyn's aides directly interfered in anti-Semitism investigations, shielding their allies from suspension and discipline. A scandal which has seen the Labour Party become the second party after the BNP to be investigated by the Equality and Human Rights Commission over racism, after the Equality and Human Rights Commission was submitted 15,000 pages of examples of anti-Semitism. A scandal which has involved a myriad of anti-Semitic and problematic comments and moves by the Labour leader himself. And after all of that, and in the week where the chief rabbi called on Labour for not doing enough, Labour launches a video on diversity which talks about equality and respect for all, which specifically refers to dozens of minority groups and other underrepresented groups, but inexplicably leaves out Jews. It's just another slap in the face for our community, that they don't want to include us in their version of diversity, and they certainly don't respect or extend that equality to Jews. One interesting defence that you see of Corbyn is that he can't be racist because his mother defended Jews when the fascists tried to march through Cable Street.
He was told to me in great detail, with one simple aim, to stop Oswald Mosley and his fascists marching through the East End. That woman was my mother. She stood here, along with so many others.
What I find interesting about this line of reasoning is that they're trying to prove Corbyn innocent by association. Bear in mind something that happened over a decade before he was born. But trying to find him guilty by association is unfathomable, even when it's happening by someone in front of his eyes or by someone who he praises and defends.
And I look forward to giving you tea on the terrace because you deserve it.
But it's all smears. This rebuff comes from two groups, with the first group informing the second. The first group are far left figures and commentators who willfully ignore the evidence and call it a smear. To them, their use of the word smear is just for a fact they don't like. This intentional labelling of it as a smear has the very successful impact of turning off their base and Labour's base to legitimate criticism. This base is the second group. They haven't seen the evidence. The output from the first group tells them to ignore it or not to seek it out. And when the evidence is in the headlines, they don't trust it. The result is that things that shouldn't be partisan issues, like anti-Jewish racism, are now heavily polarised along political lines. This is the exact same tactic we see the right wing in the US use to deflect criticism of Trump. 90% of Republicans didn't explicitly support his impeachment at the time of the House vote, and look at that result versus independents and Democrats. Similarly, 90% of Corbyn voters think that claims of anti-Semitism are wildly exaggerated, and look at that result versus those who didn't vote Corbyn leader in 2016. Another rebuff that you hear, if you want to call it that, is that, oh, look at Jewish Voice for Labour. They're Jewish in Labour, and they say it's all smears. Well, as I quoted about 3 minutes ago, there was a poll published by Survation on the 31st of October 2019 that showed that 93% of British Jews would not consider voting Labour under Corbyn in this election. And Jewish Voice for Labour are part of that other 7%. It's such a minority, it's like looking at Latinos for Trump and saying that, oh, well, I guess that addresses all my concerns about Trump being racist towards Latinos or xenophobic towards Central Americans. And bear in mind that Jews within Labour have already long had a representative voice. The Jewish Labour movement has about 10 times the number of members of the Jewish Voice for Labour, and has been affiliated with the Labour Party since 1920, 97 years before the Jewish Voice for Labour was even established. And primarily during that time, its activities have been to promote the voice of Jews within the Labour movement, and to promote socialist and left-wing ideas within the Jewish community. On the other hand, you've got the Jewish Voice for Labour, which was only established in the last 3 years, after the anti-Semitism crisis had already unfurled, as a response to it. And its primary activities during that time has been to try and discredit and delegitimise the Jewish Labour movement and to rubbish claims of anti-Semitism in Labour. And we know which the two movements Len McCluskey and the Canary would rather follow and promote. Oh, and this is JVL's General Secretary Glynn Secker lying about links between the English Defence League and Zionist Federation and asking why the Jews are in the gutter with these rats.
And Jewish leaders here also turn a blind eye to the extreme right, even when their own Zionist Federation embraces the English Defence League, a neo-fascist group banned by Facebook. What on earth are Jews doing in the gutter with these rats?
Oh, and here's JVL founding member and media officer Naomi Wimborne-Idrissi on the same anti-Semitic Facebook group that Jeremy Corbyn was in, asking anti-Semites to take the names of Jews who had disrupted a Palestine Solidarity event. Essentially, if you're not Jewish, stop saying that Labour doesn't have a problem with anti-Semites because you can find a handful of Jews that support Corbyn. This is my summary. How did this storm get so big? An allegation surfaces and Jews and their allies speak out. But then we see this upsurge from the left who want to defend themselves and their leaders against these allegations. But time and time again, we see this defence take the form of mistrust of Jews. and all too often it dips into anti-Semitic imagery, tropes and conspiracy theories. Jews and their allies get attacked and slandered, often with anti-Semitic language. This lowers the discourse on the left, where it becomes acceptable and normal to debate whether Jews are telling the truth, whether Jews are being paid, whether Jews run the media. And what started as a handful of incidents becomes the realisation for Jews that hundreds of thousands of British people are willing to accept anti-Semitism, embrace it and propagate it. And that's really scary. So more and more Jews begin to speak out, and more people in the Labour Party get defensive, and the Jews in the Labour Party get harassed, and they become to be afraid to come out and be identified as Jewish, or have their positions on Israel being verified before their views will be taken seriously. This is the toxic atmosphere in Labour, present everywhere, online, in constituency meetings and at conference. So, there's Jewish outrage, followed by a huge resistance from Labour to accept it, which leads to a further discrediting and mistrust of Jews, followed by further Jewish outrage. It sounds like a cycle, like chicken and egg, which came first? Corbyn came first. The incidents that I first showed at the beginning, this is when Labour under Corbyn first came under the spotlight. Of all the things that Corbyn has done, I think there are 4 disqualifying things. 4 things that absolutely, by themselves, make him unfit to be leader. 4 things that alone he should have resigned for. For other people there are more, but for me there are at least these 4. They are, number 1, calling for Hamas not to be designated a terrorist organisation and saying that they work for peace and social justice. This is a group whose charter calls for the death of all Jews and who carry out terrorist attacks on civilians to this day. Number 2 is appearing on Press TV alongside Abdelaziz Umar, a man who was behind specifically a terrorist attack that killed 7 civilians, and Corbyn is appearing alongside him, acknowledging that he had met him before and questioning why he was ever imprisoned. Number 3 is his involvement in a commemoration for the Black September terrorists, and his brazen response in trying to cover it up. It's not just that he was trying to spread fake news about it, but it was his refusal to acknowledge that he had done anything wrong. And number 4 is his event that he did on 2010 Holocaust Memorial Day, where he tries to perversely reverse the legacy of the Holocaust and attack its Jewish victims. Corbyn was first asked to apologise when he ran for Labour leader in 2015, and he never did so, or at least not adequately. And for 4 years we tried to tell him, apologise, retract those comments, step back, denounce those prior associations. And the reason why I think Corbyn is an anti-Semite is that I don't think he's an idiot. I think he's fully aware of what's going on around him and the views of the people that he honours and the message that sends. Through his denials, obfuscation of the process, opposition to the EHRC and support for anti-Semites within the party, he's informed his base that that's okay and has blurred the lines between what is and isn't anti-Semitic. And that's directly contributed to Labour members questioning Jews and to thinking Jews are part of a political conspiracy against him. And Labour MPs have tried to tell him, those whom have spoken out have at best been ignored and at worst been bullied out the party. And you might retort, but Corbyn doesn't literally hate all Jews, and I would agree. But that's not the bar for anti-Semitism. You would be naive and called ignorant to suggest that someone who is racist against black people literally hates all black people. That's why someone saying, I can't be racist, some of my best friends are black, is a cliche, because it indicates that person doesn't understand how their actions could be considered racist. So no, Corbyn might not literally hate all Jews, but that's neither the threshold for being anti-Semitic, nor does it undo the last hour and a half of what I've shown you in this video. Finally, the Labour Party hasn't magically healed since the December election. Corbyn is not only still involved, but he wants to ensure that the next leader carries on his mantle. We're in the election period for Labour's next leaders, and we cannot allow a cult of personality around Corbyn to cloud our judgment on anti-Jewish hate and not take it seriously. The Labour Party needs to be repaired, and the UK needs a viable opposition, and that cannot be led by someone who ever said that anti-Semitism was a smear, or who stood by throughout all of this, just to rise through the political ranks. Rebecca Long-Bailey started off her Labour leadership campaign 2 steps back when she said that she supported Corbyn all the way through and would give him a 10 out of 10. Whilst Richard Burgon wants to bring Corbyn back and said that Corbyn would make an ideal Foreign Secretary. Just no to both these statements. And that's the end of my video. Thank you for watching the whole way through. And as I said at the start, please share. I especially want Labour supporters to watch this and hopefully create a dialogue and some level of understanding.